Good morning, High 10 George Realty. Thank you for joining us on this beautiful Friday. And these meetings, unless I'm covering a whole contract, they'll be, 30 minutes. So it's better for retention and all that. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and we're going to get started. Why is it? Okay. Okay, something's haywire here. Okay, you should all be able to see now. Okay, we're not going to go through the whole request for repair, but I just want to address one point. Um, so if you're representing, well, either party, but at any rate, so let's say we have request for repair one out and the seller is not going to agree, but the buyer goes ahead and submits a request for repair two. So as a seller, we want to kill the first one, right? We want to say that they don't agree, that the seller doesn't agree. And the reason why is we don't want any miscommunication that because they moved on to request for repair number two, the buyer without, you know, killing the first one, we want to make sure that we as the seller's rep agent kill that first one so the communication is clear because these are where fights happen, okay? So if that happens to you, please kill it by checking that you do not agree. Okay, and then you're going to move on and look at their number two. As a buyer's agent, okay, you should always kill the first one and go on to the second one unless it's a continuum. Like if you're in a disagreement on most things, let's check box number two and let's say that we're withdrawing number one and we're submitting number two. Why? We want a lineup of the paperwork where somebody's not going, no, but on that first one you said, we're going to kill it. Okay. Unless you have agreement, make sure that you take that out. Don't leave it on the table. Okay. Just to make it so that nobody fights later about these things. So are there any questions on that little point? Okay. So on the BRBC, again, just a couple of things. Remember, if you wanted exclusive to check this box and also initial paragraph 15, these can be no more than 90 days. Went to a training, they had a really good point. Don't just go 3 months out because some months will have 31 days. It literally means 90 days. So make sure you're not doing 92 days or whatever because some months have a 31-day period counted out. Make sure it's not exceeding 90 days. Okay, that's from the car attorneys. So the amount of compensation is really what I want to address. When Peter and I have talked about this, when you put this in, let's say you put 3%, and then you've also checked the box that the buyer um, cannot pay, or you didn't check the box. Regardless, you put 3% here. When you write your offer, please match it. What I mean is don't ask for 2%. And then you have the buyer hanging out for a percent because you didn't ask. You need to have your fiduciary with your buyer and at least try to take the whole pot of commission over to the seller. Now, the seller can counter you to two, that's fine. But let's at the beginning try to get the whole amount of commission. So if you didn't check this box, that's really critical because the buyer would say, wait a minute, you put 3 on here, but you only asked for on the offer for 2. So why are you now asking me for a point, right? So make sure whatever that you've got here, that you're helping your buyer and you're asking for the full amount on that offer, and then let the seller counter you, okay? Does that make sense to everybody? You can stop me if you have any questions. These are just quick points that have been coming up. Okay. So if you're representing a buyer that has a contingency for sale of the buyer's property, this can get really tricky to manage it. So, first off, we need to make sure that you fill out this form and you do it properly. I'm always here and Peter's always here to help you, but we need you to fill the form out and then we'll advise you. Ask us the questions on the form you have. So I'm going to go through this form on contingency for sale of buyer's property. If this is the case, you will check the box in the RPA. It's going to auto-populate this form for you. So you would, of course, this top portion, once you auto-populate it, should be filled out already in the auto-population. So number one, buyer's property contingency. So it automatically defaults to A, that the buyer is entering into a contract for sale of and closing on buyer's property. Then it's telling you now you got to go fill out 2 and 4. So you have other choices: only entering into contract for the sale of buyer's property. You would fill out number 2, or number 3. The best choice is, and that you're check the box that you're already in escrow. So you're going to fill out the information about that current escrow of the buyer's property. So let's go down to 2. Buyer entering into contract for sale of buyer's property, and it's if 1A or B applies. It can be a little bit like a puzzle, but just keep going down and reading and it'll be easier. So the buyer has 17 days after acceptance to enter into a contract for the sale of buyer's property. So you can amend those days here if you wish. And then it says here, by the earlier of the time specified in 2A, or within 2 days or whatever days after buyer entering into a contract for sale of the buyer's property, buyer shall deliver escrow evidence to seller and escrow holder. Okay? So make sure that you're reading all these and you understand, and we can map it out together, but I would like all of you to fill your own forms out and then ask the questions and we'll work together. Listing and MLS, status of the property, if 1A or B above applies. The buyer has signed a listing agreement or shall within X amount of days after acceptance. And then they put the company here, okay? And then the buyer will submit to the MLS in the geographical area of the location of the buyer's property, or the buyer will not submit to MLS. I don't know why anybody would check that. That's not going to make the seller feel good, but anyway, they have that box there for you about not being on the MLS. And then the buyer needs to deliver to the seller the evidence of the listing agreement and, if applicable, the listing, MLS listing, the form. So you need to deliver that to the seller. So close of escrow of buyer's property. If 1A or C applies, then buyer has until the following time to close on the sale of the buyer's property. If the scheduled close of escrow of the seller's property, if checked no later than, you can amend these days. The scheduled close of escrow of the seller's property, that would mean you have a concurrent close. That's really hard, right? That can be anybody that's danced in these, there's a lot of coordination. So if you're not experienced, be real careful with this and make sure that you're up for the task of this massive coordination and dance effort, okay? So status of sale of buyer's property, if 1A or C applies, you'll need to read this paragraph. I'm not going to continue reading this. I want to point out some very important things on this. I think 7 is super critical. Paragraph 7. You need to understand this, especially here. 7B, removal of buyer's contingency and proof of funds. the seller at any time during escrow, if you leave this thing defaulted, has a right to notice you, show you the offer that they received, that they accepted in backup position, and you can be removed from escrow. Okay, if you let this contract default, right here, the seller has the right pursuant to 7B to immediately notify the buyer anytime after acceptance, meaning that they can move on with another offer if the buyer does not have sufficient funds to close and does not remove all the contingencies. So as a buyer's agent, you always want to protect your client. So you're either going to go with 2, delayed right to notify the buyer no earlier than 7 days after acceptance of the contract, or you can amend the days, or the most protective, but probably something the seller's not going to like because they don't want to be tied up, is C3, that the seller would have no right to notify the buyer about a backup offer that they wish to accept and move on with. And they have no right to invoke the provisions of 7B. This is the most protective of your buyer, but a good listing agent is going to counter it. They're going to say, okay? So I just want you to really pay attention. If you don't learn anything else from this, this is a super important paragraph. I've seen this defaulted and people don't understand that they've defaulted it for immediate removal if the seller provides you the evidence of that backup offer, okay? So the seller right to cancel, I'll let you read that on your own. And then time for performance of contract and obligations. So read these because this is important. So the contract obligations other than the deposit, time periods in the agreement for inspections, contingencies, etc. They begin immediately, or you check this box on the day after the buyer delivers to seller any of the following: escrow evidence of the buyer's property, etc. I like this better because you don't want your contingency periods probably moving until you're moving on your other deal. Again, a listing agent may counter that out, but I'm pointing it out to you. And on the buyer's deposit shall be delivered to escrow with the time specified in that agreement that you wrote, or within 3 business days after buyer delivers to seller any of the following. So make sure you're understanding these paragraphs. These are super important. So if you want to delay it, you need to check this box on B that would delay the buyer's deposit until there's escrow evidence for buyer's property, buyer's election in writing signed by buyer to begin the time periods, or the buyer's removal of buyer's property contingency. So as a seller, listing agent, probably you don't want this, but as a buyer's agent, you need to do your very best because maybe the other agent will not counter those points, but you need to go out strong for your client. As a listing agent, you need to pay attention to these paragraphs specifically, okay? So then everybody signs it. Notice to remove buyer contingencies and provide proof of funds. This is if they're invoking paragraph 7B. And so if that's the case, then the seller would sign here and date it at a later date and deliver it to the buyer unless, 7C is checked, okay? So make sure you understand this. It's kind of a puzzle, but you have to really sit and be quiet and go down each thing. But I wanted you to pay attention to those 3 paragraphs where you're checking boxes. Of course, the whole agreement is important, but that's where I'm seeing people not understand or miss it or let it default when you probably don't want that defaulting, especially in paragraph 7 if you are representing a buyer. So pay attention to those paragraphs, please. And then backup offer addendum. So this isn't a backup offer. So if the seller was going to take a backup offer, they're going to have this form filled out. And this agreement is in backup position. The number would be, maybe it's number 1. And then they will provide this form. It will be filled out. And this is backup only, right? This doesn't mean the seller has accepted your offer. It means they're putting you in backup position. So notice of cancellation and release of prior transaction. So the seller would need to complete this form at the bottom and re-sign down here once they receive notice that the other transaction is canceled. So that would be a two-step. First, they're going to sign at the top that they have that backup offer. Then they're going to sign down here if it gets canceled. Okay. So when you are reviewing an RPA as a listing agent, you help your seller by checking the box that said this is a backup offer. So it's important on the RPAs that you check the right box and provide the proper forms. And it says here that the buyer is initialing that they acknowledge receipt of the cancellation. And it says it's not required, but it's evidence that the initialing party has received this form. I would recommend you do that because we don't want hearsay or something not in writing. Make sure the buyer initials that they've been notified that that other escrow has canceled, okay? So these are just things that we've seen lately. I will continue to bring up things that we see as we're looking at transactions during the course of a week and bring them up. And then, of course, we're always here to help you, but always take a stab at filling everything out yourself, and then we can go from there and look at it together and talk it out. If you need help on that, I'm always available. Peter's always available. If something is going sideways on the weekends, Peter's usually here on Saturdays. I'm reachable by cell phone. And I'm willing to help you if you're in a bind or you don't understand something and you're going sideways on a weekend, or you feel like you just need to talk to somebody. Peter and I are here. It's to your success, and we want to help you along for closing transactions. So does anybody have any questions? Okay, it's pretty quiet. I'm going to stop my share. Okay, so I hope that helped you on a little bit. We usually aren't in those kind of contingencies, for sale of buyer's property. But if you are, let's, draft out that form and then bring it over and we'll take a look at it together so we don't miss anything that should not be defaulted if you're the buyer's agent. If you're the listing agent, you can always bring the form over and we'll take a look together and talk about it, okay? So I hope that was helpful to you in a small way. And I always think if I learn one thing a day, my day's complete. So I look to learn one thing a day. So thank you all. Okay.
Well, yeah, and then going back on Michelle's comments that you should fill out the forms before you come to see Michelle or me, because this is a learning process, and I don't want any agents to completely rely on us filling out a form for you, because you have to give some thought to it before you can come in and then you can learn from it. And we can offer you help, but we need you, we want you to be involved as well. Okay. So if you have to come in and talk to us, be ready with specific questions you want to ask about what's going on or what the issues are. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you, Michelle. Thank you, Peter.
Oh, thank you. And then Jesus Alvarez, I know he's not on the call, but he's in a FHA deal where it was a flip property and they did everything right. They got all the flip documents, who the contractors were or anything. But there's a certain day amount where FHA has their own rules, and I would assume VA that you can only sell after X amount of days. So if you are selling FHA or VA, check with the lender and ask them how long before it's not the 18 months, it's a lot shorter for FHA or VA. So make sure that you understand from the lender when is it acceptable for you to write an offer on a flip property. because he just ran into that, but we were able to remedy everything. But I just want to mention that to you. FHA and VA has more stringent rules on that. They will work with you, but when you are writing those types of offer and you know it's a flip property, touch base with your lenders so that you understand everything and what their timeline is for those types of properties, okay? All right.
Okay.
Well, thank you, everybody, and I wish you a beautiful weekend.
Thank you.
Happy Easter.
Thank you.
You don't think many Hispanic in the open.